Hey there, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home, on your commute, or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. Now, I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine this with me. You're about to take the most incredible journey through time. We're going back 3 billion years to visit Earth when it was an alien world. And I mean truly alien. This isn't some gentle stroll through a different landscape. This is a trip to a planet so hostile, so utterly foreign, that it would kill you in minutes. But here's the wild part. It's also the same planet we're sitting on right now. Ready? Let's go. You materialize on what looks like a beach, but immediately, every instinct screams that something is terribly wrong. The sand beneath your feet isn't the familiar white or golden grains you know. It's black volcanic glass, sharp and jagged, still radiating heat from recent lava flows. You can feel the warmth seeping through your shoes, and you realize this isn't sand at all. It's the shattered remains of molten rock, cooled and ground down by waves that crash with a violence you've never experienced. But look up. That's where things get really unsettling. The sky above you swirls in colors that make your stomach turn. Sickly shades of orange and brown dance across the heavens like a perpetual sunset, but there's no blue anywhere, not a single patch. You know why, right? There's no oxygen up there to scatter sunlight into that beautiful blue we take for granted. The atmosphere is a toxic soup of methane, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide. And then the smell hits you. Imagine the worst rotten egg smell you've ever encountered. That sharp, sulphurous stench that makes you gag. Now mix it with the metallic tang of hot iron. That's hydrogen sulfide and methane for you, the signature scents of early Earth. You try to take a breath and realize you can barely fill your lungs. The air is thin, alien, and absolutely lethal. Think about that for a second. Every breath you're trying to take on this ancient Earth would be your last. This atmosphere would kill you faster than being tossed into space. At least in space, you'd have a few seconds. Here, the toxic gases would shut down your cells almost immediately. The sun hangs in this poisonous sky like a dim red eye, 20% weaker than the sun, you know. You'd think a weaker sun would make the planet cold, but you're sweating. How is that possible? Well, here's where it gets fascinating. This planet stays warm thanks to a thick blanket of methane in the atmosphere. It's like Earth is wrapped in the most effective greenhouse you can imagine. Methane traps heat 25 times more efficiently than carbon dioxide, and there's so much of it here that even a weak sun can keep things toasty. But here's something that'll really mess with your head. The day is racing by. You can actually watch the sun moving across the sky because days here last only 18 hours. Why? Look up, and you'll see something that shouldn't be possible. The moon, our familiar distant moon, is hanging right there, massive and terrifying, dominating the sky like a giant watchful eye. See, 3 billion years ago, the moon was 10 times closer than it is today. 10 times. Picture the moon, you know, then imagine it filling a quarter of the sky. It's simultaneously beautiful and absolutely terrifying, because that closeness means power, gravitational power, that's pulling tides unlike anything you've ever seen. As you stand on this black glass beach, you hear a rumbling in the distance, not thunder, something deeper, more ominous. The tide is coming in, and it's not like any tide, you know. These waves, pulled by that massive moon overhead, sweep miles inland. Miles. The entire landscape you're standing on will be underwater in hours, then dry again as the moon pulls the ocean back and forth like water in a bathtub. You're starting to understand just how alien this place really is. No birds cry overhead because there are no birds. There are no insects buzzing, no leaves rustling, no familiar sounds of life at all. The only sounds are the crashes of these massive tides against bare rock and the distant rumbling of volcanoes erupting somewhere on the horizon. This is a world without a single tree, without a blade of grass, without even moss, just rock, water, and poisonous air. But wait, before you let the desolation overwhelm you, look closer. See those tide pools that the retreating waves have left behind? Walk over to one and peer down into the shallow water. At first glance it looks empty, but look more carefully. See that slime? Those strange lumpy mats spreading across the bottom like bacterial carpets? This is it. This is life, the only life on the entire planet. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is that even possible? These don't look like much. Just weird, slimy bacterial mats that most people would step around to avoid getting their shoes dirty. But you're looking at the most important organisms in Earth's history. These are stromatolites, and they're about to change everything. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of the greatest transformation in planetary history, and it's being carried out by microscopic architects that you can barely see. These bacterial colonies, these stromatolites, are builders. They've been constructing these layered rocky mounds one microscopic layer at a time, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. Here's what's wild about this process. Each mat is actually millions upon millions of cyanobacteria working together. During the day, they photosynthesize. They capture sunlight and carbon dioxide and use them to build sugars for food. But here's the kicker. As a waste product, they release oxygen, just tiny amounts per cell, but there are billions and billions of them. And they've been doing this for hundreds of millions of years already. Layer by layer, generation by generation, these bacterial colonies have been slowly, methodically, accidentally engineering the most dramatic change any planet has ever seen. They're poisoning their own world with oxygen. You see, oxygen might be the breath of life to you, but to the microbes that rule this ancient Earth, it's pure poison. Oxygen is chemically aggressive. It rips electrons away from other molecules, destroying the delicate chemistry that these early life forms depend on. For 2 billion years, life on Earth has been anaerobic. It's evolved to live without oxygen, and suddenly, these little cyanobacteria are pumping the stuff into the atmosphere. But here's the thing that gives me chills every time I think about it. They have no idea what they're doing. These bacteria aren't planning to transform the planet. They're not trying to create conditions for future life. They're just living their lives, doing what evolution has programmed them to do: survive and reproduce. The global transformation is just a side effect. Imagine if humans were accidentally changing the fundamental chemistry of Earth's atmosphere just by breathing. Well, actually, don't imagine it. We kind of are, but that's a story for another day. The point is, these stromatolites are committing accidental genocide on a planetary scale, and in doing so, they're creating the conditions that will eventually lead to everything that comes after: forests, dinosaurs, mammals, and eventually you. Look around this alien world one more time. Try to picture what's coming. In about 400 million years, these bacterial mats will have pumped so much oxygen into the atmosphere that the entire planet will transform. The methane greenhouse will collapse as oxygen tears apart the methane molecules. Temperatures will plummet, and the whole planet will freeze solid in what scientists call snowball Earth. It'll be the closest life ever comes to complete extinction. But some organisms will survive in the ice, and when the planet thaws, something new will emerge. Cells that can actually use oxygen, that can harness its destructive power to generate energy more efficiently than anything before. These will be the ancestors of every complex organism on Earth, including us. The toxic waste product of these humble bacteria will become the fuel that powers every breath you take, every thought you think, every step you take. The oxygen in your blood right now, every molecule of it, was once the exhaust fume of a cyanobacterium that lived billions of years ago. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, in this moment 3 billion years ago, you're witnessing the very beginning of the most important biological revolution in Earth's history. These slimy mats in the tide pools don't look like much, but they're about to reinvent life itself. As you stand on this black volcanic beach, breathing your last breaths of alien air, watching that enormous moon pull impossible tides across a world that's simultaneously familiar and utterly foreign, remember this: you're not just observing the past, you're looking at your own deep ancestry. Every cell in your body carries instructions written by these ancient survivors. Every breath you take depends on molecular machinery they invented. Every heartbeat relies on energy systems they developed. The story that begins here, in these unremarkable bacterial mats, in these warm, shallow pools under a poisonous sky, is your story. It's the story of how chemistry learned to copy itself, how waste became fuel, how catastrophe became opportunity, and how the most important things often happen when nobody's watching, when life is just doing what life does, one microscopic layer at a time. And here's the truly mind-blowing part: we're still finding their descendants today. In places like Shark Bay in Australia, you can see stromatolites that look exactly like these ancient ones, still growing, still building, still pumping out oxygen just like their ancestors did 3 billion years ago. They're living fossils, unchanged witnesses to the greatest transformation our planet has ever seen. So the next time you take a deep breath of fresh air, remember these bacterial pioneers. Remember this alien world where it all began. Remember that the oxygen filling your lungs was once the most dangerous pollutant on Earth, and that life didn't just survive that crisis. It turned it into the foundation for everything that followed. The journey we're taking together through these 7 chapters is really the journey from this moment, standing on black glass under a poisonous sky, to the moment you're in right now, breathing easy in a world these ancient microbes made possible. It's a story of transformation, resilience, and the incredible creativity of evolution when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. And trust me, we're just getting started. Wait until you hear what happens when chemistry learns to copy itself, when the sky catches fire, and when ancient survivors start building the molecular machines that still power your body today. Let's rewind even further. We need to go back to the very beginning, 4 billion years ago, when Earth was a chemistry set gone absolutely mad. Picture this planet as a bubbling, chaotic laboratory, where volcanoes weren't just occasional eruptions but constant furnaces spewing cocktails of gases into the atmosphere. Asteroids weren't rare cosmic visitors. They were regular delivery trucks, dropping off organic molecules from the depths of space like some kind of interplanetary postal service. This wasn't the neat, orderly world we know today. This was pure chaos, and yet, in all that mayhem, something extraordinary was about to happen. Something so remarkable that it makes every science fiction story seem ordinary by comparison. Chemistry was about to learn how to copy itself. Now, I want you to imagine a specific place on this ancient Earth. Charles Darwin, 3 billion years later, would dream about warm little ponds where life might have begun. He had no idea how right he was, but he also couldn't have imagined just how dramatic the real story would be. Picture a tidal pool near a volcanic vent. The ground beneath is hot, shot through with mineral-rich water that bubbles up from deep in the earth. This isn't your peaceful seaside tide pool. This is a cauldron of creation. Hot water, loaded with dissolved minerals, surges up through cracks in the rock, carrying with it a soup of chemicals that would make any chemist's head spin. As the tides retreat, something amazing happens. The pool concentrates. All those molecules that were spread out in the vast ocean suddenly find themselves crowded together in a small space, like passengers packed into a subway car. Among them are some very special molecules called nucleotides, and here's the crazy part. These are going to become the letters of the genetic alphabet. Every A, T, G, and C in your DNA started as simple nucleotides floating around in pools just like this one. But here's where it gets really wild. The heat from the sun makes these molecules dance. I mean literally dance. Thermal energy causes them to vibrate and move and bump into each other. When they collide just right, they link together. But then night falls, temperatures drop, and they settle down and bond more permanently. Day after day, night after night, for millions upon millions of cycles, this dance continues. Heat makes them active, cold makes them stable. It's like the entire planet is running a massive chemistry experiment, heating and cooling and mixing and matching molecules over timescales that make human civilization look like a brief flicker. And then, after millions of these cycles, something unprecedented happens. A molecule emerges that can do something no molecule has ever done before. It can make rough copies of itself. Think about that for a second. In all the universe, as far as we know, this is the moment when matter first learned to reproduce, not just to exist, not just to react chemically, but to actually create copies of itself. It's like the universe suddenly discovered how to use a photocopier. Now, this wasn't DNA. That masterpiece would come later, after evolution had time to refine the process. This was RNA, messier, more prone to errors, but also more versatile. And here's something that'll blow your mind. RNA could do two things that no molecule had ever done before. It could store information like a computer hard drive, and it could speed up chemical reactions like a catalyst. It was both the cookbook and the chef. In 1982, a scientist named Thomas Cech would win a Nobel Prize for proving what these ancient molecules already knew, that RNA could be an enzyme, a molecule that makes other chemical reactions happen faster. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. 4 billion years ago, these RNA molecules were just figuring out their incredible abilities. Here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this moment in history. We're not talking about some intelligent designer carefully crafting the first life forms. We're talking about physics and chemistry just following their basic rules. Heat makes molecules move. Cooling makes them stick together. Concentration makes reactions more likely. Simple rules, but when you play them out over millions of years in billions of tide pools across an entire planet, you get something that looks like magic but is really just chemistry exploring every possible combination. But the game changes completely when fatty molecules start spontaneously forming bubbles around these self-copying RNAs. You see, certain molecules called lipids have a strange property. One end loves water, the other end hates it. When you put them in water, they automatically arrange themselves into bubbles with the water-loving ends facing out and the water-hating ends facing in. It's like they're building their own little shelters. And suddenly, just like that, the first cells exist. Not because someone designed them, not because life decided it needed protection, but because physics and chemistry were just doing what they do. These lipid bubbles form naturally, and some of them happen to trap RNA molecules inside. Picture this moment. Inside these microscopic bubbles, protected from the harsh world outside, the RNA molecules can multiply and mutate in relative safety. It's like evolution just invented its first laboratory, a controlled environment where genetic experiments can happen without being immediately destroyed by the chaos outside. Most of these experiments fail. That's important to understand. Most RNA copies are disasters. They can't reproduce, they fall apart, they just don't work. But some survive. And here's the kicker. Some of them don't just survive, they actually get better at surviving. They become more efficient at copying themselves, more resistant to damage, better at using the resources around them. This is natural selection, and it's been running non-stop for 4 billion years. It's the most powerful optimization process in the universe, and it all started in these tiny bubbles floating in ancient tide pools. Now, fast forward about 1,100,000,000 years, these cells have been evolving, adapting, spreading across the planet's shallow seas. They've learned new tricks, developed new abilities, but they're still fundamentally simple. Just single cells floating around, absorbing chemicals, copying themselves. But then, something happens that changes everything. Some of these cells master a new trick that will transform the entire planet. Using nothing but sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, they figure out how to build their own food, sugars that store energy from the sun, and as the waste product of this process, they release a gas that will eventually become the most important molecule for complex life: oxygen. These are the cyanobacteria, and by 2,900,000,000 years ago, they're starting to build those stromatolites we met in Chapter 1. Layer upon layer, year after year, their fossil remains are still visible today in places like Shark Bay, Australia. When you see them, you're looking at organisms that look exactly as they did 3 billion years ago. They're living time machines, unchanged witnesses to the greatest transformation in Earth's history. But here's what really gets me excited about this story. Every single step, from those first self-copying RNA molecules to the complex cyanobacteria-building stromatolites, happened through natural processes. There was no plan, no goal, no intelligence guiding the process. Just chemistry and physics and time, vast amounts of time, allowing every possible experiment to be tried. And yet, the results are more incredible than anything human intelligence has ever designed. These early cells developed molecular machines of stunning sophistication. They figured out how to harvest energy from sunlight with an efficiency that makes our best solar panels look primitive. They invented quality control systems for copying DNA that are more accurate than our best computers. They developed recycling systems that waste absolutely nothing. You want to know something amazing? The ribosomes that built the proteins in your body this morning, the molecular machines that read your genetic code and assemble amino acids in exactly the right order, those ribosomes have cores that haven't changed in 3 billion years. The fundamental structure, the basic operating system that builds every protein in every living thing, was perfected by ancient bacteria and has been so successful that evolution has never needed to change it. When you eat food, your cells perform a process called glycolysis to extract energy. This is a 10-step chemical dance that breaks down sugars and releases energy. Guess what? It's the exact same 10-step process that fed the first cells. Your body remembers how to extract energy without oxygen because for 2 billion years, that's all life knew how to do. The story of RNA learning to copy itself isn't just ancient history. It's the foundation that everything else is built on. Every thought you think, every heartbeat, every breath, all of it depends on molecular machinery that was invented by those first cells in their lipid bubbles 4 billion years ago. And here's the part that really blows my mind. We can see this process happening right now. Scientists have created RNA molecules in the lab that can copy themselves. They've watched lipid bubbles form spontaneously around genetic material. They've seen the first steps of life happening in test tubes. The miracle that happened 4 billion years ago isn't a one-time event. It's a process that's still possible today, given the right conditions. What this tells us is profound. Life isn't some incredibly unlikely accident that happened once in cosmic history. Life is what happens when chemistry gets complex enough and has enough time to explore its possibilities. The same basic ingredients that created the first life on Earth, water, organic molecules, energy sources, and time, exist throughout the universe. When we look at Mars and see evidence of ancient rivers and lakes, when we detect organic molecules in the clouds of Titan, when we study the subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus, we're not just looking for alien life. We're looking for the conditions where chemistry might have learned to copy itself somewhere else, but we're getting ahead of ourselves again. Before we can search for life on other worlds, we need to understand what happened next on our own planet. Because those oxygen-producing cyanobacteria that evolved from the first, self-copying molecules, they were about to cause the biggest environmental catastrophe in Earth's history. They were going to poison their own world so thoroughly that it would nearly end the story of life before it really got started. And yet, that catastrophe would become the foundation for everything that followed, including the complex cells that would eventually become you. Sometimes, the worst disasters create the best opportunities, and the oxygen catastrophe is the perfect example of evolution turning crisis into triumph. For 400 million years, oxygen was Earth's best-kept secret. I want you to picture this. Cyanobacteria are pumping out oxygen in those shallow seas, generation after generation, but none of it's accumulating in the atmosphere. None of it. Every molecule of oxygen that gets produced is immediately grabbed by iron, dissolved in the oceans, like the planet has an insatiable appetite for this new gas. And here's what's wild about this process. It's creating some of the most beautiful rocks on Earth. Those vast deposits of banded iron formations you can see in places like Western Australia, with their striking red and black stripes, those are like tree rings of planetary history. Each band represents a cycle of oxygen production and iron oxidation, layer after layer, century after century. Geologists can read these rocks like a book, tracking exactly how much oxygen was being produced and when. But here's the thing about iron. It runs out. After 400 million years of soaking up every molecule of oxygen the cyanobacteria could produce, the dissolved iron in the oceans finally gets used up, and that's when everything changes. Around 2,400 million years ago, free oxygen begins accumulating in the atmosphere for the first time in Earth's history. At first, it's just trace amounts, barely detectable, but once it starts building up, there's no stopping it. The cyanobacteria don't slow down just because the iron's gone. They keep right on photosynthesizing, keep right on releasing oxygen as waste, and that's when the greatest environmental catastrophe in Earth's history begins to unfold. Now, I want you to really understand what this means. Imagine you're one of the anaerobic bacteria that make up 99% of life on Earth at this time. For 2 billion years, that's twice as long as complex life has existed. You and your ancestors have thrived in an oxygen-free world. Your entire biochemistry, every chemical reaction that keeps you alive, has evolved to work without oxygen. In fact, oxygen is toxic to you. It's literally poisonous. And now, slowly at first but with increasing speed, this toxic gas is seeping into every corner of your world. There's nowhere to hide. Oxygen is chemically aggressive. It rips electrons away from other molecules, destroying the delicate chemistry that life depends on. For these ancient bacteria, it's like the air itself is turning into acid. But that's just the beginning of the catastrophe. Remember that thick methane blanket that's been keeping Earth warm for billions of years? Well, oxygen tears methane apart. When oxygen and methane meet in the atmosphere, they react violently, breaking down the methane molecules and destroying Earth's greenhouse effect. Picture what happens next. The planet's thermostat, which has been stable for 2 billion years, suddenly breaks. Without that methane greenhouse, temperatures plummet. And when I say plummet, I mean the entire planet freezes solid. This is called the Huronian glaciation, but scientists also call it snowball Earth, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Ice covers the planet from the poles to the equator. Glaciers grind across continents. The oceans freeze to depths of over a mile. For 300 million years, that's longer than complex animals have existed, Earth becomes a giant snowball spinning through space. Think about that for a second. 300 million years of global winter. If you could have visited Earth during this time, you would have seen a planet that looked more like one of Jupiter's ice moons than the vibrant world we know. White from pole to pole, with only the peaks of the highest mountains poking through the ice like lonely islands in a frozen sea. And here's the truly terrifying part. This came close to ending life's story completely. The The vast majority of species that had evolved over the previous 2 billion years went extinct. Entire ecosystems collapsed. The diversity of life that had been slowly building for eons was wiped out in what might be the closest life has ever come to total extinction. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Life finds a way. It always does. Deep in the ice, in tiny pockets of liquid water around volcanic vents, in the thin layer of water beneath kilometers of ice, some organisms survived. And among those survivors lurked something remarkable. Bacteria that had evolved molecular machines capable of actually using oxygen instead of being poisoned by it. Instead of having their chemistry destroyed by oxygen's aggressive electron stealing, these bacteria had figured out how to harness that destruction. They learned to use oxygen to burn their food, extracting energy with an efficiency that no anaerobic organism had ever achieved. We're talking about 18 times more energy from the same amount of food. 18 times. It's like the difference between a campfire and a rocket engine. Both burn fuel, but one is incredibly more powerful than the other. And then, around 1,500,000,000 years ago, something happens that sounds like science fiction, but is absolutely real. A larger cell encounters one of these oxygen-using bacteria and does what predators do. It swallows it. But instead of digesting its prey, something goes wrong. Or maybe something goes very, very right. The swallowed bacterium doesn't die. Instead, it sets up shop inside the larger cell and starts providing energy in exchange for protection and food. It's like the ultimate business partnership. The small cell becomes the power plant, and the large cell becomes the factory and the home. This swallowed bacterium becomes what we now call the mitochondrion, the powerhouse of the cell. Every animal cell in your body right now contains hundreds or thousands of these mitochondria, all descended from that first bacterial merger 1.5 billion years ago. When you flex your muscles, it's mitochondria providing the power. When your brain processes thoughts, it's mitochondria supplying the energy. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement you make depends on the descendants of bacteria that learn to survive the oxygen catastrophe. But here's the part of this story that really gets me fired up. For decades, this idea was considered absolutely ridiculous by the scientific establishment. The scientist who proposed it, Lynn Margulis, faced rejection and ridicule for suggesting that complex cells evolved through bacterial partnerships rather than gradual modification. She submitted her paper describing endosymbiosis, the idea that one cell could live inside another, to journal after journal, only to have it rejected by peer reviewers who thought the concept was too far-fetched. One reviewer actually wrote that her ideas belonged in science fiction, not science. But Margulis didn't give up. She kept refining her evidence, kept looking for new ways to prove her theory. She studied the DNA inside mitochondria and discovered something amazing. It was more similar to bacterial DNA than to the DNA in the cell nucleus. She found that mitochondria reproduce by dividing in two, just like bacteria, rather than being assembled from scratch like other cellular components. It took her decades of fighting the scientific establishment, but by the 1970s the evidence became overwhelming. She had revolutionized our understanding of how complex life evolved, and she'd revealed one of the most beautiful truths in biology, that every breath you take depends on an ancient truce between former enemies. The oxygen that would have killed your distant ancestors is now the fuel that powers your life, thanks to mitochondria that remember how to harness its destructive power. It's like evolution took the most dangerous poison on Earth and turned it into the foundation for all complex life. But the story gets even more remarkable when you realize that this wasn't a one-time event. Margulis showed that chloroplasts, the green structures in plants that capture sunlight, are also descendants of ancient bacteria that were swallowed and domesticated. Plant cells are actually triple partnerships: the main cell, the mitochondria for power, and the chloroplast for photosynthesis. When you look at a tree, you're looking at a biological alliance that's been running successfully for over 1 billion years. The tree cell provides structure and coordination, the mitochondria provide power for growth and metabolism, and the chloroplasts capture sunlight and turn it into sugar. 3 ancient enemies that became partners and ended up conquering the planet. And here's what really blows my mind about the oxygen catastrophe. It shows us that the worst environmental disasters can become the foundation for incredible breakthroughs. Those cyanobacteria didn't set out to transform the planet. They were just trying to survive, just following their programming to capture sunlight and reproduce. But their waste product, oxygen, accidentally created the conditions for a completely new kind of life. The survivors of the oxygen holocaust didn't just adapt to the new conditions, they turned catastrophe into opportunity. They took the poison that had killed most of life and turned it into the most efficient energy source on the planet. They transformed the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history into the foundation for everything that came after. This pattern, disaster leading to innovation, crisis spurring evolution, repeats throughout the history of life. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs opened up ecological niches that mammals filled. The ice ages that nearly wiped out early humans forced them to develop bigger brains and better tools. Every major catastrophe in Earth's history has been followed by an explosion of innovation and diversity. But none of those later catastrophes compare to the oxygen holocaust in terms of sheer transformation. This wasn't just a mass extinction that opened up new opportunities. This was a complete rewriting of the rules of life itself. Before oxygen, cells were limited to relatively simple biochemistry and low-energy lifestyles. After oxygen, the energy budget of life increased 18-fold, making possible the complex biochemistry needed for big cells, multicellular organisms, and eventually, intelligence. The oxygen that's filling your lungs right now as you listen to this story, every molecule of it is a reminder of the greatest environmental catastrophe in Earth's history, and the most successful recovery in the history of life. The air you breathe is both the poison that nearly ended life's story and the fuel that made complex life possible. And when scientists look for signs of life on other planets, one of the things they search for is oxygen in the atmosphere. Not because oxygen means life is thriving, but because oxygen means life has been around long enough to fundamentally transform its world. It's a signature of biological success so complete that it changes the chemistry of an entire planet. The next time you take a deep breath, remember that you're breathing the exhaust fumes of ancient bacteria, processed by descendants of the survivors of the greatest catastrophe Earth has ever seen, delivered to your cells by molecular machines that remember how to turn poison into power. That's not just biology, that's poetry written in chemistry across billions of years. In 1953, a young graduate student named Stanley Miller was about to shake the foundations of biology with what seemed like a simple experiment. Miller had a wild idea that most of his professors thought was probably a waste of time. He wanted to recreate the conditions of early Earth in his laboratory and see if life's building blocks could form naturally. Picture this. Miller filled glass flasks with methane, ammonia, and water vapor. His best guess at what Earth's atmosphere was like 4 billion years ago. Then he did something that sounds almost childishly simple. He zapped it with electricity to simulate lightning. That's it. Just sparks flying through a mixture of gases and water. For the first few days, nothing much seemed to happen. The water stayed clear, the gases just circulated through his apparatus, and I imagine Miller wondered if he was wasting his time on a foolish experiment that would earn him nothing but skeptical looks from his advisors. But then something amazing started to happen. The clear water began to change color. First it turned pink, then brown, then a rich, dark soup that looked like coffee. When Miller analyzed what he'd created, he couldn't believe the results. In just a few days of electrical sparks, his simple mixture of gases had produced amino acids, the fundamental building blocks of proteins. Think about that for a second. With nothing but the basic ingredients that would have been present on early Earth and some electrical energy, Miller had created the molecular components that life uses to build itself. The primordial soup wasn't just a theoretical concept anymore. It was sitting right there in his laboratory, dark and rich with organic molecules. The scientific community went crazy. Here was proof that life's components could form naturally under conditions that probably existed on the early Earth. You didn't need a miracle or divine intervention, just chemistry, energy, and time. But Miller's experiment was just the beginning. What we really needed to understand early life was to learn how to read time itself, written in the language of rocks and molecules. And that's where some of the most exciting detective work in science began. Fast forward to the late 20th century, when geologists started exploring some of the most ancient places on Earth. In Western Australia's Pilbara region, a geologist named Roger Buick was studying rocks that most people would walk right past, ancient, weathered formations that don't look like much to the untrained eye. But these rocks are 3,500,000,000 years old. Think about that. They formed when Earth was still in its infancy, when the continents were just beginning to take shape, when the atmosphere was still poisonous to anything we'd recognize as complex life. Buick sliced these ancient rocks into sections thin enough to see through and put them under his microscope. What he saw shouldn't have been possible according to everything scientists thought they knew about early life. There, preserved in silica like insects trapped in amber, were chains of microscopic cells arranged in unmistakable patterns. These weren't just random blobs or mineral formations that might look like cells if you squinted hard enough. These were organized, structured, clearly biological forms that had been turned to stone while still maintaining their cellular architecture. It was like finding a photograph of your great-great-great-grandmother buried in a time capsule, except this photograph was 3.5 billion years old. But the discoveries didn't stop there. An international team working in Greenland found something even more incredible. Stromatolites dating back 3,700,000,000 years. That pushed back life's timeline by another 2 million years, closer and closer to the formation of Earth itself. Here's what gets me really excited about these discoveries. We're not just finding random fossils scattered here and there. We're finding entire ecosystems preserved in stone. These ancient stromatolites show clear evidence of complex bacterial communities working together, building layer upon layer, creating structures that are virtually identical to the living stromatolites we can still see today in places like Shark Bay. It's like discovering that life had already figured out community cooperation, construction, and ecosystem engineering when the Earth was barely out of its infancy. While the planet was still being bombarded by asteroids and volcanic eruptions were reshaping the surface, bacteria were already organizing themselves into sophisticated communities. But the real breakthrough in understanding early life came when scientists developed an even more powerful tool, the ability to read the history of life directly from DNA itself. Every living thing carries in its genes a record of its evolutionary history, like a molecular library that's been accumulating information for billions of years. By comparing DNA sequences across all living things, from bacteria to blue whales to giant sequoias, scientists can build family trees that stretch back through deep time. And what they discovered is absolutely mind-blowing. Despite the incredible diversity of life on Earth, despite millions of species that look and behave in completely different ways, all life shares the same basic genetic code. Every living thing on Earth uses the same 4-letter alphabet of DNA. Every organism uses the same genetic dictionary to translate DNA instructions into proteins. This isn't just a coincidence. It's evidence that all life descends from a single ancestor. Scientists call this ancestor Luca, the last universal common ancestor. This was a cell that lived perhaps 3,800,000,000 years ago, and it's the great-great-great-grandmother of every living thing on Earth. Every bacterium, every tree, every whale, every human being can trace their lineage back to this single ancient cell. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Scientists can use molecular clocks, comparing how much DNA has changed between different species, to estimate when major evolutionary events happened. It's like being able to measure time using mutations as a stopwatch. And what they've discovered is that life diversified incredibly rapidly once it got started. The major branches of the tree of life, bacteria, archaea, and the ancestors of complex cells, all split apart within a few 100 million years of Luca. That might sound like a long time, but in geological terms, it's remarkably fast. Meanwhile, in laboratories around the world, scientists are recreating the conditions of ancient Earth to test their theories about how life began. They grow bacteria in oxygen-free chambers that mimic the early atmosphere. They subject microbes to radiation levels that would kill humans instantly, discovering organisms like Deinococcus radiodurans that can rebuild their shattered DNA in just a few hours. These experiments reveal capabilities that seem almost supernatural. Some bacteria can survive temperatures that would melt lead. Others can live in acid strong enough to dissolve metal. Still others can feed on pure radiation, using nuclear decay as an energy source the way plants use sunlight. Each of these extreme survivors gives us clues about what early life might have been capable of. If modern bacteria can survive conditions that would instantly kill any complex organism, imagine what the ancestors of all life could endure when Earth was a much harsher place. But perhaps the most exciting discoveries come from studying the deep underground. Scientists have found bacteria living 2 miles down in South African gold mines, completely cut off from the surface world. These deep earth bacteria have been isolated for millions of years, feeding on radioactive decay and chemicals leaching from rocks. When you think about it, this is probably more like the environment where life actually began, not in some peaceful surface pond, but deep underground, where heat and chemistry and radioactive energy could drive the complex reactions needed to create self-replicating molecules. And here's what really gets me excited about all this research. Every new discovery, whether it's ancient fossils in Australian rocks or extreme bacteria in deep mines, expands our understanding of what life is capable of. Each finding pushes back the boundaries of where and when and how life might exist. When we discover bacteria that can survive in pure acid, that tells us that the acidic clouds of Venus might not be as lifeless as we thought. When we find organisms thriving on radiation, that opens up the possibility of life in the radiation-soaked environments around Jupiter's moons. When we see bacteria flourishing in conditions that mimic early Earth, it suggests that life might be more common in the universe than we ever dared hope. The molecular detectives have given us something incredible, the ability to read the autobiography of life itself, written in DNA and preserved in stone. We can trace the family relationships between all living things. We can estimate when major evolutionary innovations occurred. We can even begin to understand what the very first cells were like and how they managed to survive in conditions that would seem impossible to us. But perhaps most importantly, this research has revealed that life is far more resilient, far more creative, and far more ancient than anyone imagined. The story of life doesn't begin with complex organisms in a peaceful environment. It begins with incredibly tough, resourceful cells that could survive anything the early Earth could throw at them. And that story is written in every cell of your body. The proteins being built in your cells right now are assembled by ribosomes, molecular machines so ancient and so successful that their core structure hasn't changed in 3 billion years. The code they use to read your DNA is exactly the same code used by the bacteria living in the deepest mines and the most extreme environments on Earth. You're not just related to these ancient survivors. You're built using their blueprints, running their software, carrying their innovations in every cell. The story that scientists are reading in stones and DNA, isn't just the history of life, it's your history. Stretching back through deep time to those first brave cells that figured out how to survive on an alien Earth and started the greatest success story in the history of the universe. Look at your hand right now. Go ahead, really look at it. Flex your fingers, make a fist, wiggle your thumb. That simple movement you just made required energy from approximately 100 trillion mitochondria, every single one of them a descendant of that bacterial merger we talked about, the one that happened 1,500,000,000 years ago. But the connections between you and those ancient microbes run so much deeper than just energy production. You see, you're not just related to the first life on Earth. You're literally built from their inventions, running their software, powered by their engines. Every single biological process happening in your body right now is using molecular machinery that was perfected billions of years ago. Let me show you what I mean. Every protein in your body, and there are hundreds of thousands of different types, is assembled by structures called ribosomes. These are massive molecular machines, each one containing over 80 different proteins and several RNA molecules, all working together with clockwork precision to read your genetic code and build proteins one amino acid at a time. Here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about ribosomes. Their core structure hasn't changed in 3 billion years. The part of the ribosome that actually does the work of linking amino acids together is made entirely of RNA, not protein. And that RNA core is virtually identical in every living thing on Earth, from the simplest bacteria to the most complex mammals. Think about that for a second. The molecular machine that built the proteins in your brain this morning, that assembled the enzymes digesting your breakfast, that constructed the antibodies protecting you from disease, that machine is using a design that was perfected by ancient bacteria when Earth was still a hostile alien world. It's like discovering that every car ever built, from the first Model T to the most advanced electric vehicle, uses the exact same engine design. Except this engine was invented by microbes 3 billion years ago and has been so successful that evolution has never needed to improve it. But let's go even deeper. Watch what happens when you eat something. As that food breaks down in your stomach and intestines, the nutrients eventually make their way into your cells, and then your cells perform a process called glycolysis to extract energy from those nutrients. Glycolysis is a 10-step chemical dance that breaks down sugars and releases energy your cells can use. Each step is precisely controlled by specific enzymes, each reaction perfectly timed to hand off its product to the next step in the sequence. It's like a molecular assembly line that's been running continuously for billions of years. And here's the kicker. It's the exact same 10-step process that fed the first cells. Your body is performing the identical chemical reactions that kept bacteria alive 3 billion years ago. Even more amazing, your cells can perform this process without oxygen, just like those ancient anaerobic bacteria had to. Your body remembers how to survive without oxygen because for 2 billion years, that's all life knew how to do. Even now, when oxygen is abundant, your cells fall back on this ancient backup system whenever they need energy quickly, like when you're sprinting and your muscles can't get oxygen fast enough through your bloodstream. Every time you feel that burning sensation in your muscles during intense exercise, that's your cells switching over to the ancient anaerobic system, the same chemical pathway that powered life before the oxygen catastrophe. You're literally feeling the biochemistry of ancient Earth working inside your body. But perhaps the most remarkable piece of ancient machinery still running your body is something called ATP synthase. This is the protein complex that generates most of your cellular fuel, molecules called ATP, that power everything from muscle contractions to nerve impulses to the construction of new proteins. ATP synthase works like a molecular water wheel. Hydrogen ions flow through it like water flowing over a mill wheel, causing part of the protein to spin. And when I say spin, I mean really spin. This molecular motor rotates at about 100 revolutions per second, faster than most car engines. As it spins, ATP synthase grabs molecules of ADP and phosphate and literally forces them together to create ATP, storing energy in the chemical bonds. It's a rotary engine built from proteins, and it's so efficient that it can produce thousands of ATP molecules every second. Here's what gives me chills about this machine. It's virtually identical in every living thing on Earth. The ATP synthase spinning in your mitochondria right now is essentially the same design that powers bacteria, plants, fungi, and every other form of life. When scientists first visualized this protein actually spinning in 1997, they couldn't believe that nature had invented a rotary engine 3 billion years before humans thought of it. But the most profound connection between you and ancient life is written in your DNA itself. The genetic code, the way that 3-letter sequences of DNA specify which amino acid to use when building proteins, is universal. The gene from ancient bacteria can function perfectly in human cells because we all speak the same molecular language. This isn't just a loose similarity, it's exact correspondence. The same 3-letter DNA sequence that told ancient bacteria to use the amino acid phenylalanine tells your cells to use phenylalanine. The genetic dictionary that was established when life was young has been so fundamental, so perfectly functional, that it's never changed. When genetic engineers want to produce human insulin for diabetics, they don't need to figure out how to translate human genetic instructions for bacterial cells. They just insert the human gene directly into bacteria, and the ancient bacterial machinery reads it perfectly and produces perfect human insulin. 3 billion years of evolution, and the basic language of life hasn't changed one bit. But let me tell you about my favorite piece of ancient machinery that's still working in your body, something called the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle. This is a circular series of chemical reactions that happens in your mitochondria, and it's responsible for extracting most of the energy from the food you eat. Picture this. Nutrients from your food enter this cycle and get systematically broken down, step by step, in a precise sequence of chemical reactions. Each step is designed to extract a little bit of energy and pass the modified molecule to the next step. It's like a molecular recycling plant that squeezes every possible bit of energy out of its raw materials. The beautiful thing about this cycle is that it's exactly that, a cycle. The molecule that starts the process gets regenerated at the end, ready to start the whole process over again. It's a perfect closed loop that can run continuously as long as fuel keeps coming in. And this elegant system, it was invented by ancient bacteria and has been running continuously for billions of years. The same chemical cycle that powered the first complex cells is generating the energy for your thoughts right now as you listen to this story. Here's something that really puts this in perspective. Scientists estimate that every day your body produces and uses ATP equivalent to about your own body weight. If you weigh 150 pounds, your cells manufacture and consume 150 pounds of ATP every single day. Most of that production happens through ancient systems that were perfected before complex life even existed. You're like a biological ship of Theseus, constantly replacing parts but maintaining the same ancient design. The proteins in your body are being broken down and rebuilt continuously. Most of them last only days or weeks before being recycled. But the systems that build those proteins, the genetic instructions that guide their construction, the metabolic pathways that power their assembly, those are billions of years old. When you really think about it, you're not so much a individual organism as you are a temporary arrangement of ancient molecular systems. The atoms in your body have been recycled through countless other organisms. The genes in your cells have been passed down through an unbroken chain of reproduction, stretching back to the first life on Earth. The molecular machines doing the work of life inside you have been continuously operating for 3 billion years. But here's what I find most amazing about all this ancient machinery still running your body. It's not just functional, it's beautiful. The precision of the ribosome reading genetic code is like watching a master craftsman at work. The spinning of ATP synthase is as elegant as any human-designed engine. The choreographed dance of the citric acid cycle is more complex and sophisticated than any chemical process we've ever invented. Evolution didn't just stumble onto systems that barely work. Over billions of years, it refined these molecular machines to near perfection. The error rate of DNA replication is about 1 mistake per billion letters copied. The efficiency of photosynthesis is close to the theoretical maximum allowed by physics. The precision of protein folding allows molecules to find their correct shape among astronomically large numbers of possible configurations. You are the current expression of the most sophisticated technology in the known universe. Molecular machines so advanced that we're still figuring out how they work, so reliable that they've been running continuously for billions of years, so elegant that they make our best engineering look crude by comparison. And yet all of this incredible sophistication arose not through design, but through the simple process of natural selection acting over vast periods of time, random mutations creating slightly different versions of molecular machines, with the best versions surviving and reproducing, generation after generation, improvement after improvement, for 3 billion years. The next time you move your hand, remember that you're operating equipment perfected by ancient bacteria. When you eat, remember that you're powering yourself with chemical processes invented billions of years ago. When you think, remember that you're using energy generated by molecular motors that have been spinning since before complex life existed. You're not just a human being living in the 21st century. You're the latest model of a biological machine that's been in continuous development for 3 billion years, built from components invented by the first successful life forms, running software written by evolution over timescales that make human civilization look like a brief flicker. And the most remarkable part, all of this ancient machinery is still evolving, still being refined, still being passed down to the next generation. The story that began with self-replicating molecules in warm tidal pools continues through you and through your children and through every living thing that will ever exist. You're not just connected to ancient life, you are ancient life, wearing a temporary human form but carrying eternal molecular traditions that connect you to every organism that has ever lived. If life could emerge in Earth's early hellscape, in a world of poisonous air, volcanic chaos, and radiation levels that would fry any complex organism, then where else might it be hiding? This question drives some of the most exciting research happening right now, and it's leading scientists to the most extreme places on our own planet. Picture this. In Yellowstone National Park, where tourists come to see geysers and hot springs, scientists are making discoveries that rewrite our understanding of life's limits. In the boiling pools where the water reaches 200 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill any plant or animal instantly, they've found bacteria called thermophiles that don't just survive these temperatures, they thrive in them. These aren't bacteria struggling to stay alive in hostile conditions. These are organisms that have made superheated water their preferred habitat. They've evolved molecular machinery that works better at near boiling temperatures than at room temperature. Cool them down, and they actually slow down and become less efficient. Think about that for a second. We've discovered life that considers boiling water to be a comfortable living environment. If organisms can adapt to conditions that would cook any complex life form, what does that tell us about the possibilities for life elsewhere in the universe? But Yellowstone is just the beginning. Scientists have found life in places that seem utterly impossible. Beneath the Antarctic ice, in Lake Vostok, water that hasn't seen sunlight for 15 million years, buried under 2.5 miles of ice, bacteria are not just surviving, but flourishing. They've been completely isolated from the surface world since before human ancestors climbed down from trees, yet they've maintained complex ecosystems in perpetual darkness. Here's what gets me really excited about Lake Vostok. This isn't just some isolated bacterial colony hanging on by a thread. When scientists finally managed to drill through the ice and sample the water, they found a diverse community of microbes, each specialized for different roles in this dark, cold ecosystem. After 15 million years of isolation, life didn't just persist, it diversified. But even more extreme is what scientists have discovered in South Africa's gold mines. 2 miles underground, in rocks that haven't been exposed to surface conditions for millions of years, bacteria are living off pure radioactivity. They use radioactive decay as an energy source the way plants use sunlight. These organisms have been completely cut off from the sun's energy for geological ages, yet they've found a way to power themselves using nuclear processes. Let me put this in perspective. These bacteria are living in conditions more extreme than the surface of Mars. No oxygen, no sunlight, crushing pressure, intense radiation, and they're not just surviving, they're reproducing, evolving, creating their own little underground biosphere, powered by the atomic decay of uranium and other radioactive elements. Each of these discoveries expands our understanding of life's possible hiding places. Every time scientists think they've found the absolute limit of where life can exist, they discover organisms pushing those boundaries even further. And this is why astrobiologists get so excited when Mars rovers find evidence of ancient rivers and lakes. They're not looking for signs that Mars was once like Earth today. They're looking for signs that Mars was once like Earth 3 billion years ago. The methane plumes that space probes have detected, rising from the Martian surface, might be geological, produced by chemical reactions in rocks, but they might also be biological, signatures of methanogens like those that dominated early Earth. Here's what's fascinating about methanogens. These are among the most ancient forms of life on Earth, bacteria that produce methane as a waste product. They can survive in environments with no oxygen, extreme temperatures, high pressure, and intense radiation. If life exists on Mars today, it's probably hiding underground in conditions very similar to what methanogens prefer. The search for extraterrestrial life got everyone's attention in 1996, when scientists studying a meteorite from Mars thought they'd found fossil bacteria. This meteorite, designated ALH 84001, had been blasted off the Martian surface by an asteroid impact millions of years ago, wandered through space, and finally crashed in Antarctica, where scientists found it. When they examined it under powerful microscopes, they saw structures that looked remarkably like tiny bacteria. The shapes were right, the sizes were right, and they were found alongside minerals that bacteria on Earth often produce. For a brief, thrilling moment, it seemed like we had proof that life had evolved independently on another planet. The controversy that followed taught us something important about how hard it is to prove ancient life, even when you can hold the rocks in your hands. Other scientists pointed out that the structures could be mineral formations that just happened to look biological. The organic molecules found in the meteorite could have come from contamination after it landed on Earth. Even today, nearly 30 years later, scientists are still debating whether ALH 84001 contains evidence of Martian life. But that controversy inspired something incredible. New missions, new techniques, new ways of thinking about biosignatures that might reveal life's presence even when the organisms themselves are long gone. But the search for life has gone far beyond Mars. Scientists now propose that life might exist in some of the most exotic environments in the solar system. Saturn's moon, Titan, has lakes and rivers, but instead of water, they're filled with liquid methane and ethane. Could there be organisms that use hydrocarbons the way Earth life uses water? It sounds impossible until you remember that life on Earth has already figured out how to live in environments that seem equally extreme. If bacteria can thrive in boiling acid, in radioactive rocks, in water that's been frozen for millions of years, why not in hydrocarbon lakes on a moon where the surface temperature is -300 degrees Fahrenheit? Even more intriguing, are the subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus, moons of Jupiter and Saturn respectively. These worlds are covered in ice, but beneath that frozen surface, they harbour oceans of liquid water that contain more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. These aren't just theoretical oceans. Space probes have detected geysers of water vapour shooting out through cracks in the ice. Here's what gets me really excited about these subsurface oceans. They have all three ingredients that Earth's early life needed: liquid water, chemical energy sources, and billions of years of stable conditions. The tidal forces from Jupiter and Saturn keep these oceans warm and create the kind of chemical gradients that could power metabolism. When the Cassini spacecraft flew through the geysers erupting from Enceladus, it detected not just water vapor but organic molecules and the building blocks of life. These moons aren't just cold, dead ice balls. They're active worlds with complex chemistry happening in their hidden oceans. The James Webb Space Telescope has taken this search to an even grander scale, studying the atmospheres of planets orbiting other stars. When starlight passes through a planet's atmosphere, different molecules absorb different wavelengths of light, creating a kind of chemical fingerprint. Scientists can now detect water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, and other molecules in the atmospheres of worlds hundreds of light years away. But here's the thing that really drives home how much our perspective has changed. When scientists look for biosignatures, chemical signs that might indicate life, they're not looking for the oxygen-rich atmosphere we have today. They're looking for the chemical signatures of worlds that might be going through their own version of the early Earth drama we've been exploring. A planet with methane and oxygen in the same atmosphere would be incredibly interesting, because those gases react with each other and disappear quickly unless something is constantly replenishing them. On Earth, life produces both gases. Bacteria make methane, plants make oxygen. Finding both together on another world might be the signature of a biosphere in the midst of its own oxygen revolution. Venus, our nearest planetary neighbour, might once have had oceans and could have been habitable for billions of years before its runaway greenhouse effect turned it into a hellscape. But even today, scientists have detected phosphine in Venus's clouds, a gas that, on Earth, is only produced by anaerobic bacteria. Could there be microbes floating in Venus's acidic atmosphere, descendants of organisms that once lived in ancient Venusian oceans? Each of these possibilities builds on lessons from early Earth. Life, it turns out, needs three basic things: liquid water, energy sources, and time. Give evolution those three ingredients, and the chemical creativity we've discovered in Earth's extremophiles suggests that life might be less of a miracle and more of an inevitable result of chemistry, exploring its possibilities. The search has even inspired scientists to look for biosignatures we haven't thought of yet. What if alien life uses different chemistry than Earth life? What if it's based on silicon instead of carbon, or uses ammonia instead of water? The more we learn about extremophiles on Earth, the more possibilities we can imagine for life elsewhere. But perhaps the most profound implication of this research is what it tells us about Earth's story. Every extreme environment where we find life, every impossible condition where organisms thrive, expands our understanding of what was possible during Earth's early history. If bacteria can live 2 miles underground, powered by radioactivity, then the subsurface of early Earth was probably teeming with life, even when the surface was being sterilized by asteroid impacts. If organisms can survive 15 million years under Antarctic ice, then life could have persisted through the worst mass extinctions in Earth's history by retreating to underground refuges. The hunt for Earth's cousins isn't just about finding life elsewhere, it's about understanding the full scope of life's possibilities here at home. Every extreme organism we discover is a window into the past, showing us what early life might have been capable of, how it might have survived catastrophes that would have seemed unsurvivable. And every new world we study, from the methane lakes of Titan to the hidden oceans of Europa, is a natural experiment in what happens when chemistry gets complex enough to start organizing itself. We're not just searching for alien life, we're studying the laboratory of the universe, watching countless experiments in the origin and evolution of complexity. The story that began in Earth's warm little ponds might be just one chapter in a much larger story, a cosmic story of chemistry becoming biology, of simple molecules learning to replicate and evolve, and eventually to contemplate their own existence. Whether that story is rare and precious, or common and inevitable, is one of the greatest questions science has ever asked, and we're finally developing the tools to answer it. Stand outside on a clear day and take a deep breath. Feel that oxygen filling your lungs, powering every cell in your body. That breath you just took represents one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of our planet. The oxygen you're breathing took cyanobacteria 2 billion years to make Earth's atmosphere breathable for complex life. 2 billion years. Let that sink in for a moment. Those tiny bacterial mats we met at the beginning of our journey worked for 2,000 million years to transform a poisonous atmosphere into one that could support the kind of life that includes you. The crisis they caused, the oxygen holocaust that nearly ended life's experiment, became the foundation for everything that followed. But here's what I find most inspiring about that story. The survivors didn't just adapt to the new conditions. They turned catastrophe into opportunity. They took oxygen, the poison that had killed most of life on Earth, and transformed it into the most efficient energy source the planet had ever known. They used disaster as raw material for innovation. And that pattern, crisis spurring breakthrough, catastrophe becoming opportunity, is being repeated right now in laboratories around the world. Today's synthetic biologists are engineering bacteria to eat plastic waste, turning one of our biggest environmental problems into food for microorganisms. They're designing bacteria that produce biofuels, converting sunlight and carbon dioxide into gasoline. They're programming microbes to manufacture medicines, turning simple nutrients into complex pharmaceuticals. But here's the thing that gives me chills. They're not inventing entirely new tricks. They're adapting ancient ones. Every synthetic biology breakthrough builds on molecular machinery that evolution spent billions of years perfecting. When Craig Venter's team creates synthetic cells by writing genetic code on computers, the cellular machinery that reads those new instructions is 3 billion years old. Think about that for a second. We can now write genetic programs on computers, print them out as DNA, and inject them into cells. An ancient bacterial machinery will read our code perfectly and execute our instructions flawlessly. The programming language of life, that universal genetic code we talked about, is so robust, so perfectly designed, that it can run software written by humans billions of years after it was invented. This isn't just a scientific curiosity, it's a preview of how we might solve some of our biggest challenges. Climate change seems overwhelming until you remember that microbes once completely transformed an entire planet's atmosphere. The difference is that they had millions of years, and we have decades. But we also have something they lacked: intention. Scientists are already proposing ways to use enhanced photosynthesis to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere faster than any natural process. They're engineering coral that can survive in warmer, more acidic oceans. They're designing bacteria that could help terraform Mars by producing oxygen and breaking down toxic compounds in Martian soil. These aren't science fiction fantasies. They're applications of mechanisms that nature has already tested and refined over billions of years. We're not trying to invent biological processes from scratch. We're learning to use the molecular tools that evolution has already perfected. But the story of early life teaches us something even more important than technological possibilities. It teaches us about patience and resilience on timescales that make human problems seem manageable. It took 900 million years from life's first appearance to the evolution of the first eukaryotic cells, those complex cells with nuclei that would eventually become plants and animals and fungi. Another billion years passed before multicellular life appeared, then hundreds of millions more years before complex ecosystems, before intelligence, before consciousness. Every major breakthrough in the history of life was preceded by what looked like failure. The oxygen catastrophe killed most life on Earth, but it set the stage for complex cells. Mass extinctions eliminated entire ecosystems, but they opened up new ecological niches for innovation and diversification. Setbacks weren't failures. They were evolution exploring possibilities, testing new solutions, finding ways to turn crisis into opportunity. When we face challenges that seem impossible, we might remember that we're made of atoms, forged in stars, assembled by processes refined over billions of years, carrying instructions written by countless generations of survivors. Consider what 3 billion years of evolution has accomplished. Starting with simple self-replicating molecules in warm tidal pools, natural selection has produced organisms that can see individual photons of light, that can navigate by magnetic fields, that can survive in the vacuum of space. It's created brains that can contemplate their own existence, hands that can manipulate matter at the atomic level, minds that can understand the history of the universe itself. And all of this incredible complexity arose not through design or planning, but through the simple process of copying, varying, and selecting. Random mutations, creating slightly different versions of molecular machines, with the best version surviving to make more copies, generation after generation, improvement after improvement, for 3 billion years. You are the current result of the most successful research and development program in the known universe. Every system in your body has been tested and refined by billions of years of natural selection. The molecular machines running your cells are more sophisticated than anything human engineers have ever built. The software running in your DNA is more complex and more elegant than any computer program ever written. But here's what really takes my breath away about this story. You're not just the product of 3 billion years of evolution. You're evolution's latest tool for understanding itself. For the first time in Earth's history, matter has organized itself into forms complex enough to study their own origins, to decode their own history, to understand the processes that created them. When you learn about photosynthesis, you're using a brain built by evolution to understand how evolution invented the capture of sunlight. When you study genetics, you're using mind to comprehend the molecular basis of mind itself. When you contemplate the origin of life, you're matter contemplating its own transformation, from simple chemistry to self-aware complexity. And that understanding is changing us. We're the first species that can deliberately direct its own evolution. We can edit our own genes, design our own biological systems, even create entirely synthetic organisms. We've become evolution's partners rather than just its products. But with that power comes responsibility. The same molecular tools that could solve climate change could also create new environmental disasters. The same genetic engineering that could eliminate diseases could also create new forms of biological warfare. The synthetic biology that could help us terraform other planets could also accidentally damage the ecosystems that support us here on Earth. The wisdom of 3 billion years teaches us that life is resilient but not indestructible. Earth has survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, and the complete transformation of its atmosphere. But it's also experienced mass extinctions that eliminated most species and reset the course of evolutionary history. We're living through what some scientists call the 6th mass extinction, caused not by asteroids or volcanoes but by human activity. Species are disappearing at rates that rival the worst catastrophes in Earth's history. But we're also the first species that can recognize what's happening and potentially do something about it. The molecular tools that evolution spent billions of years developing are now in human hands. The question is whether we're wise enough to use them well. Can we learn from the story of cyanobacteria, who accidentally poisoned their world but ultimately made complex life possible? Can we understand that short-term disruption might sometimes be necessary for long-term survival? Here's what gives me hope. The same evolutionary processes that created the oxygen catastrophe, that survived the ice ages, that recovered from mass extinctions, are still running. Life is still evolving, still adapting, still finding new solutions to new challenges. But now, for the first time, evolution has conscious partners who can help guide the process. We can preserve genetic diversity by protecting ecosystems and storing genetic information. We can accelerate beneficial adaptations by using genetic engineering to help species cope with rapid environmental change. We can even resurrect extinct species by reconstructing their genomes from ancient DNA. Most importantly, we can think about the future in evolutionary timescales. The challenges we face today, climate change, resource depletion, overpopulation, are serious but not insurmountable. If we remember that evolution routinely solves problems that seem impossible, the bacteria that survived the oxygen catastrophe didn't just endure, they thrived and diversified and eventually gave rise to every complex organism on Earth. The species that survived mass extinctions didn't just hang on, they radiated into new forms and filled new ecological niches and created new possibilities. We have every reason to believe that life will not only survive the current challenges, but use them as opportunities for innovation and growth. The question is whether we'll be part of that future success story or just another evolutionary experiment that didn't quite work out. But here's what I really want you to take away from this journey through deep time. The story that began with self-replicating molecules in ancient tide pools isn't finished. It's still being written. And you're not just a reader of this story, you're one of its authors. Every choice you make, every child you have, every innovation you support, every ecosystem you protect or destroy becomes part of the continuing story of life on Earth. The molecules in your body will be recycled into other organisms. The genes you carry will be passed on to future generations. The ideas in your mind will influence the trajectory of human civilization and perhaps the future of life itself. You're a temporary arrangement of ancient elements, animated by molecular machines perfected over billions of years, carrying genetic instructions written by countless generations of survivors, participating in the greatest success story in the history of the universe. The warm little ponds where it all began are still out there. The molecular machinery of the first cells is still running in every organism on Earth. The genetic code written by ancient bacteria is still being read in every cell of your body. The story continues, and its next chapter is being written right now. Take another deep breath. Feel that ancient gift of oxygen filling your lungs. Remember that you're connected to every organism that has ever lived, part of an unbroken chain of reproduction and adaptation stretching back to the very beginning of life itself. You are not separate from nature. You are nature, thinking about itself, understanding itself, taking responsibility for itself. You are evolution, becoming conscious of its own power, and that might be the most remarkable development in 3 billion years of biological innovation. The story that began in chaos will continue through you, through your children, through every generation that follows, carrying forward the molecular wisdom of ancient survivors into whatever comes next. And that, to me, is the most beautiful and hopeful truth that 3 billion years can teach us. The story is still being written, and we get to help write it. Thanks for taking this incredible journey with me through deep time. From alien beaches to bacterial partnerships, from global catastrophes to molecular machines, from ancient survivors to future possibilities, this is the story of life, the story of us, the greatest story ever told, and it's still being written.